In 1933, a quarter of all Canadians had no income at all. Not low income, no income. Families on the prairies watched topsoil blow away like smoke, while mothers in Montreal lined up at soup kitchens with empty bread bags. But somehow, those families ate. They invented sandwiches out of almost nothing, fillings that sound impossible today, but kept children alive through the worst decade this country has ever seen. Number 18 on this list was so common in relief camps that grown men cried when they smelled it, decades later. And number 1 was the sandwich that fed more Canadian families than any government program ever did. These are the 25 poor man sandwiches from Depression-era Canada that time forgot. Number 25th, the mustard sandwich. When the cupboard held nothing but a loaf and a jar of French's, mothers made do. 2 slices of day-old bread, a thin scrape of prepared yellow mustard, and that was dinner. In homes across Hamilton and Windsor, where auto plants had shut down, children ate mustard sandwiches 3 nights a week without complaint, because complaining meant you did not understand how bad things really were. The mustard provided a sharp bite that tricked the tongue into thinking there was more to the meal. A jar of French's cost 5 cents in 1932, and lasted a month if you were careful. Children carried these to school wrapped in newspaper, eating quickly so no one saw what was inside. The mustard sandwich was not a recipe, it was a confession. A quiet admission that this week there was nothing else. Yet mothers served it with the same dignity they served everything, because dignity was the last thing the Depression could take from them. Number 24, lard and salt sandwich. Before the war, before margarine became common, lard was the cheapest fat in Canada. Rendered from pork trimmings at the local butcher, a pound cost maybe 8 cents. Mothers spread it thick on bread the way you would butter, then hit it with a generous shake of salt. That was the whole sandwich. In mining towns across Cape Breton and northern Ontario, lard sandwiches went down the shaft with men every morning. The fat kept you warm, kept your hands from shaking at the rock face, and the salt replaced what you sweated out underground. The lard congealed in cold weather, turning the bread translucent and waxy. Nobody loved it. But it delivered calories when calories were the difference between standing up and falling down. Number 23rd, sugar sandwich, 2 slices of bread, a smear of butter if you had it, margarine if you did not, then a spoonful of white sugar pressed into the fat so it would not fall out. The sugar sandwich was dessert, treat, and bribe rolled into one. Mothers on the prairies handed these to crying children when there was nothing else sweet in the house. A 5-pound bag of sugar cost about 35 cents in 1931, and rationed carefully, it lasted weeks. The crunch of sugar against soft bread created a texture that children genuinely loved. Some families used brown sugar instead, which gave a deeper, almost toffee-like flavor. In Saskatchewan, where wheat prices had collapsed to 25 cents a bushel and farm families burned their own grain for heat because coal was too expensive, the sugar sandwich became an act of mercy. You could not give your child a future, but you could give them something sweet before bed. Number 22nd, bread and molasses. In the Maritimes, blackstrap molasses was cheaper than jam, cheaper than sugar, cheaper than almost anything that tasted good. A gallon tin from Crosby's cost about 40 cents, and it lasted a family of 6 the better part of a month. Mothers poured it over buttered bread, letting the thick dark syrup soak into the crumb until the slice turned almost black. The flavor was intense, sweet, bitter, mineral-rich, and unmistakably maritime. Children in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia grew up believing this was normal. Fishermen carried molasses sandwiches on boats because the sugar gave quick energy, and the iron in the blackstrap kept you on your feet. Doctors in Halifax actually recommended it for anemic children because families could not afford meat. The molasses sandwich was poverty food that turned out to be genuinely nutritious. They just knew it kept the color in your cheeks when everything else had gone gray. Number 21, potato sandwich. Leftover mashed potatoes from last night's supper, spread cold between 2 slices of bread. Sometimes with a shake of pepper. sometimes with nothing at all. The potato sandwich thrived in Quebec, where large Catholic families stretched 10-pound bags of potatoes across impossible weeks. A bag cost about 15 cents in 1933. Mothers mashed them with water when milk was too dear, and the leftovers became tomorrow's lunch. The texture was heavy and starchy, the kind of sandwich that sat in your stomach like a stone and made you feel full even when you were not. The potato sandwich asked nothing of you except that you chew and swallow and be grateful there was bread at all. Number 20, onion sandwich. A raw onion, sliced paper thin, layered on bread with salt and a scrape of lard. The onion sandwich was the meal of last resort in farming communities across the prairies when the root cellar held nothing else. Onions kept through the winter better than almost any vegetable, and a bushel cost next to nothing. The sharp bite cleared your sinuses and watered your eyes, but it filled the gap between meals. Some mothers fried them soft in a bit of dripping, which transformed the sandwich into something almost luxurious. In Alberta, families who had lost everything to drought and grasshoppers lived on onion sandwiches for weeks at a stretch. The smell clung to your clothes, your hands, your school desk. Teachers knew which children came from the hardest families by the smell of onions on their breath. Nobody said a word about it. Everybody understood. Number 19, bean sandwich. When a pot of baked beans had been on the stove since Monday, and by Thursday the sauce had thickened to a paste, mothers spooned it between bread and called it supper. The bean sandwich was a staple of Ontario factory towns, where laid-off workers survived on dried navy beans bought in bulk for pennies a pound. The beans mashed into the bread, staining it reddish brown, and every bite was soft, sweet, and filling. Children ate bean sandwiches without complaint because beans meant the pot was still on the stove, and a pot on the stove meant things were not as bad as they could be. Number 18, the bread and gravy sandwich. This is the one that haunted relief camp men for the rest of their lives. In the federal relief camps that operated across British Columbia and Ontario from 1932 to 1936, men worked for 20 cents a day, plus room and board. The board was often bread with thin gravy ladled over it, served open-faced on tin plates. The gravy was flour, water, and whatever drippings could be scraped from the bottom of the camp kitchen's roasting pans. Sometimes there was a whisper of meat flavor. Sometimes it was just brown paste. Men folded the bread over, making a sandwich they could carry to the worksite. They ate it cold, standing in the rain, building roads that led nowhere for wages that bought nothing. Decades later, veterans of those camps told interviewers that the smell of flour gravy still made their throats tighten. Not from hunger, from the memory of being young, strong, and utterly discarded by the country they were building. The bread and gravy sandwich was not just food, it was the taste of abandonment. First, pattern break. Here is where the story shifts. Not every Depression sandwich was born from desperation, some were born from cunning. Canadian mothers were among the most resourceful cooks in the world during the 1930s, and what they did with almost nothing would put modern meal prep influencers to shame. The next entries on this list prove that poverty did not kill creativity, it sharpened it. These women turned pantry scraps into meals their children actually looked forward to. And the techniques they invented are so effective that professional chefs now teach them in culinary schools without ever crediting the farm wives and factory mothers who figured it out first. Number 17, peanut butter and onion sandwich. This sounds wrong until you try it. Peanut butter spread on bread with thin slices of raw onion pressed into it. The sweetness of the peanut butter met the sharp bite of the onion, and somehow, impossibly, it worked. Families in Manitoba and Saskatchewan discovered this combination because peanut butter and onions were two of the cheapest foods that kept without refrigeration. A jar of peanut butter cost about 15 cents and lasted for weeks. The onion added crunch and savory depth to what was otherwise a monotonous staple. Children who grew up on these sandwiches swore by them into old age, insisting that the combination was better than any jam. Food scientists would later explain that the pairing works because allium compounds in onions enhance the umami in roasted peanuts, creating a flavor complexity that neither ingredient achieves alone. Your great-grandmother did not know the science. She just knew her kids ate every bite and stopped crying. That was science enough. Number 16, ketchup sandwich. 2 slices of bread, ketchup. That was the recipe in its entirety. Heinz ketchup cost about 12 cents a bottle in 1934, making it one of the most affordable sources of flavor in the Canadian pantry. In industrial towns across southern Ontario, children ate ketchup sandwiches as an after-school snack because there was nothing else between meals. The ketchup sandwich carries a stigma even today. Mention it in conversation and people wince, but for thousands of Canadian children in the 1930s, it was the taste of coming home, of something red and familiar on the plate when everything else had been taken away. Number 15, fried bologna sandwich. Bologna was the cheapest processed meat in Canada during the Depression. A half-pound roll cost maybe 10 cents at the butcher counter, and sliced thin, it stretched across days. The genius was in the frying. Mothers scored the edges of each slice so it would not curl, then fried it in a dry pan or a smear of lard until the edges blackened and the meat puffed with heat. Slapped between bread with mustard or ketchup, the fried bologna sandwich became a genuine treat in homes where meat of any kind was a weekly event. The sizzle of that bologna in the pan was the sound of something good happening. Children pressed their faces against the kitchen doorway, waiting for that smoky, salty smell to reach them. In Newfoundland, which was not yet part of Canada but suffering the same depression, fried bologna became so central to the diet that it never left. It remains a cultural staple to this day. The frying did something magical to a cheap product. It created crispy edges, caramelized sugars, and a smoky depth that made 10 cents feel like $1. Number 14, egg sandwich. When hens were still laying and the family had not yet sold them for feed money, eggs were the most reliable protein on the farm. A hard-boiled egg, mashed with a fork, mixed with a pinch of salt and a drop of vinegar, spread on bread. No mayonnaise, because mayonnaise costs money. No celery, no relish, no extras. Just egg and bread. In rural Ontario and Quebec, children carried egg sandwiches to one-room schoolhouses in lard pails, the smell unmistakable by noon. Some mothers stretched a single egg across 2 sandwiches by adding mashed potato to the filling. The egg sandwich was protein you could hold in your hand, and in a decade when protein was the hardest thing to come by, that made it precious. Number 13, bread and butter pickle sandwich. When the garden produced more cucumbers than the family could eat, mothers spent August afternoons pickling everything in sight. Jars of bread and butter pickles lined cellar shelves by September, their sweet vinegar brine glowing amber through the glass. By January, when fresh vegetables were a memory and the root cellar was running low, those pickles became sandwich filling. Layered between bread with nothing else, the bread and butter pickle sandwich delivered sweetness, acid, and crunch in a single bite. The pickles were free. The bread was cheap. And the sandwich tasted like summer preserved in glass, a reminder that the garden would come back, that the ground would thaw, that this would not last forever. Children loved them. The sweetness was a rare pleasure in kitchens that ran on salt and starch. Number 12, sardine sandwich. Tinned sardines, imported from Brunswick, Maine, or later from the sardine canneries in New Brunswick, cost about 5 cents a tin. Inside, packed in oil or mustard sauce, lay enough protein to fill 2 sandwiches. Mothers mashed the sardines with a fork directly on the bread, bones and all, and the calcium from those tiny soft bones was likely the only source many depression children had. The smell was powerful enough to clear a classroom, and children who carried sardine sandwiches to school learned quickly to eat alone. But the flavor was rich, salty, and deeply satisfying. Fishermen's families in the Maritimes considered sardines ordinary, inland families considered them exotic. Either way, that little tin delivered more nutrition per penny than almost anything else in the store. The sardine sandwich was poverty food that modern nutritionists would now call a superfood. It just took 90 years for science to catch up with necessity. Second pattern break. Here is the part nobody talks about. The Canadian government knew families were starving, and their response was recipe pamphlets. The Dominion Department of Agriculture published bulletins suggesting meals costing under 5 cents per person. These pamphlets assumed you had a functioning kitchen, running water, and a stove. Many families had none of these, and through all of it, mothers kept making sandwiches. Because a sandwich required no stove, no fuel, and almost no time. Just bread, whatever you could find, and the will to keep feeding your family one more day. Number 11, cheese dream. The cheese dream was a Depression-era open-faced sandwich that turned a single slice of processed cheese into something almost elegant. Mothers laid a slice of cheese on bread, sometimes added a thin ring of onion or a dot of mustard, and slid it under the broiler or into a hot oven until the cheese bubbled and browned. The name came from the golden dreamy melt that pooled across the bread. A pound of processed cheese cost about 20 cents and could make 8 cheese dreams, enough to serve the family twice. The broiling created a crust on the cheese that crackled when you bit through it, giving way to soft, salty warmth beneath. Children treated cheese dreams like a special occasion. The effort of heating the oven and watching the broiler made it feel intentional, like someone had decided today was worth something more than cold bread and leftovers. Number 10, carrot sandwich. Grated raw carrot mixed with a pinch of sugar and spread on buttered bread. The carrot sandwich appeared in farm kitchens across the prairies, where root vegetables were the only crop that survived the drought years. Carrots kept in sand in the root cellar through the winter, and grated fine, they produced a surprisingly sweet, moist filling. Some mothers mixed the carrot with a bit of peanut butter for staying power. Others added raisins when they could be found. The orange color looked cheerful on the plate, a small victory in kitchens where everything else was brown or gray. Women's Institute cookbooks from Alberta in 1934 listed the carrot sandwich as a recommended school lunch, praising its nutrition and economy. The children who ate them did not care about nutrition. They just knew it tasted better than mustard and did not smell like sardines. Number 9, condensed milk sandwich. Eagle, brand sweetened condensed milk, spread on bread like frosting. This was a treat so decadent by Depression standards that children remembered it into their 90s. A tin cost about 12 cents, and it was meant for baking, but spread thin on bread, it became a sandwich that tasted like cake. The thick sweet milk soaked into the crumb and turned each bite into something approaching dessert. In northern communities where fresh milk spoiled quickly and dairy cows had been sold to pay debts, condensed milk was sometimes the only milk product in the house. Mothers rationed it carefully, a teaspoon per slice, making a single tin stretch across a week of lunches. The condensed milk sandwich was an indulgence that cost almost nothing but felt like everything. In a decade defined by doing without, it was the closest thing to a celebration that many children knew. Number 8, toast, water sandwich. When a child was sick and the family could not afford medicine, mothers made toast water. Burnt toast was soaked in hot water, then strained, and the resulting brown liquid was believed to settle the stomach. But the leftover toast, softened and warm, was sometimes spread between fresh bread with a pinch of salt. Bread between bread. It sounds absurd, but the warm, soggy filling had a comforting, almost porridge-like quality. This sandwich existed at the very edge of what food could be. Mothers made it because giving a sick child something warm between bread felt like medicine when real medicine was beyond reach. Number 7, flapper pie filling sandwich. On the prairies, flapper pie was the signature dessert, a custard pie topped with meringue in a graham cracker crust. When mothers made the custard filling but had no graham crackers for the crust, they sometimes spread the cooled custard between slices of bread. The result was a sweet, creamy sandwich that children devoured. The custard was simple: milk, sugar, eggs, cornstarch, and vanilla. Ingredients that most farm families could produce or barter for. The sandwich version was unofficial, undocumented, and entirely a product of mothers improvising. No cookbook recorded it, no pamphlet recommended it. It existed only in family memory, passed from grandmother to mother to child in kitchens where recipes were never written down. Number 6, pork scruncheon sandwich. In Newfoundland, where the Depression hit a colony already on its knees, salt pork was the backbone of the diet. Scruncheons were the crispy bits of salt pork fried until golden and shattered. They were piled on bread while the rendered fat was still warm. The sandwich was intensely salty, rich with pork flavor, and so filling that a single one could carry a fisherman through a morning on the water. Salt pork cost pennies a pound and kept indefinitely, making it the perfect Depression protein. The scruncheons crackled between your teeth, and the fat soaked through the bread, turning it golden and translucent. Mothers fried scruncheons in cast iron pans blackened by decades of use, and the smell brought every child in the house to the kitchen. This sandwich never disappeared from Newfoundland. It survived Confederation, survived modernization, survived everything that erased other Depression foods. Because some things are too good to forget, no matter where they came from. Number 5, syrup sandwich. Rogers, golden syrup or Crown brand corn syrup poured over buttered bread, folded in half, and eaten over the sink so the drips did not hit the floor. The syrup sandwich was a Western Canadian institution, as common in Alberta farmhouses as wheat in the fields. A tin of golden syrup cost about 20 cents and seemed to last forever. The flavor was pure liquid sweetness, thick and warm if the tin had been sitting near the stove. Children ate syrup sandwiches with an intensity that bordered on devotion. The syrup ran down chins and between fingers, and mothers handed out damp cloths without complaint because a sticky child was a fed child, and a fed child was a victory. Some families drizzled the syrup over lard instead of butter, which sounds grim but actually created a richer, more complex flavor. The syrup sandwich was pure energy, pure comfort, and pure Canadian. It tasted like home when home was the only thing you had left. Number 4, tomato sandwich. In late summer, when backyard gardens finally produced, ripe tomatoes were sliced thick and laid on bread with salt and pepper. That was the entire recipe. The tomato sandwich was seasonal perfection, available only for a few weeks in August and September, which made it feel precious. The juice soaked through the bread and ran down your wrists. The flavor was sweet and bright and tasted like the sun after months of root vegetables and preserved food. Mothers who had spent the winter stretching turnips and onions into meals watched their children eat tomato sandwiches with something close to relief. The garden was producing. The worst was over for another year. Everywhere in Canada, that first ripe tomato on bread meant summer had kept its promise. Number 3, bread and bacon fat sandwich. Bacon was a luxury during the Depression, but bacon fat was saved with religious devotion. Every drop was strained through cheesecloth into a tin kept by the stove. That precious fat went on to bread the way butter never could, because butter cost 35 cents a pound and bacon fat was free. The fat carried a smoky, salty flavor that made plain bread taste like a meal. In Quebec, families called it graisse de rôti and spread it on thick slices of pain de ménage. In the West, ranching families treated the dripping jar like currency. A full jar meant security, an empty jar meant trouble. The bacon fat sandwich was the most basic transaction between hunger and survival, repeated millions of times across a country that had promised prosperity and delivered dust. Number 2, mock chicken sandwich. During the Depression, chicken was a luxury most families saw only at Christmas, if they saw it at all. So mothers invented mock chicken, a filling made from finely chopped pork or veal scraps mixed with salad dressing, celery salt, and a squeeze of lemon. The result tasted remarkably like chicken salad, enough that children believed it was real, and parents never corrected them. The recipe appeared in community cookbooks from Winnipeg to Windsor, each version slightly different, each claiming to be the original. Mock chicken sandwiches showed up at church socials and potluck suppers, where admitting the filling was not actually chicken would have been a social catastrophe. The deception was collective, agreed upon without words. Everyone knew. Nobody said. A pound of pork scraps cost a few cents. A jar of salad dressing cost a dime. And for that investment, a mother could serve her family sandwiches that tasted like a life they could not afford. Mock chicken was not just a recipe, it was aspiration spread between two slices of bread. Number 1, bread and peanut butter. In the end, it always comes back to peanut butter. The sandwich that fed more Depression-era Canadian children than any relief program, any government pamphlet, any church charity. A jar of peanut butter cost 15 cents in 1933. A loaf of bread cost a dime. For a quarter, a mother could feed her children lunch for a week. The protein kept muscles from wasting. The fat kept bodies warm through prairie winters that dropped to -40. Peanut butter did not spoil. It did not need refrigeration. It tasted the same in January as it did in July. Mothers spread it thin to make it last, or thick when the jar was new and generosity felt possible. Children ate it without complaint 5 days a week, because peanut butter was the constant in lives where nothing else was. It was the answer to the only question that mattered during the worst years this country has ever known. How do I feed my children today? Peanut butter answered that question every single time. And for a generation of Canadians who survived the Depression, the taste of peanut butter on bread was never just a sandwich. It was proof that their mothers found a way when there was no way left to find. These 25 sandwiches are more than recipes. They are the record of a country that went hungry and refused to stop feeding its children. Try one this week: the mustard sandwich, the bread and molasses, the fried bologna. Then tell me in the comments whether your grandmother made something that did not make this list. Because every family has one, a sandwich that nobody wrote down, that nobody photographed, that existed only in the memory of a child who grew up and never forgot what it tasted like to be loved when there was nothing left to give.